Kind of like the books they're trying to remove from certain sections of the local library, another protection bill has been pulled off a back shelf and presented at the State House. Could the third time this session be the charm for Republican lawmakers? Sometimes you need a professional's opinion, especially when it comes to mental health. So we asked one to get her thoughts on telehealth appointments for students at school.
If you want more time in the evening after work, you go to work earlier.
Ah, yes, it wouldn't be daylight saving time without the annual debate about whether it should exist. Well, losing those late evening daylight hours is one step closer to happening in Idaho, but there are several other big steps that need to happen first.
It's for adults. That's not for children. Kids that are 18 and under don't have any reason to access that material. And so we're being consistent with that.
Aren't y'all tired? I know I'm tired. I don't want to be here. I really don't have an argument. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sing.
You've got 90 seconds.
I know. You've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year. You're being.
Ah, yes, we're at that point in the legislative session where, like the modern Prometheus or Frankenstein's monster, seemingly dead bills come back to life. And like community theater, the public signs up to sing about it. More on Idaho's latest synodical songbird in a moment. But why the audition for The Voice where nobody seemed to turn their chair today? Well, that's because the original bill to regulate library books was kind of revived today in the House State Affairs Committee. It's been a long session, so here's the spark notes or cliff notes, depending on your generational approach. House Bill 384 passed the State Affairs Committee back in January, but the floor sent it back to the committee because they wanted a compromise bill with the Senate. Well, that's when the Senate created Senate Bill 1289, which got criticism for being too weak and too complicated. That one failed the Senate floor in February by a single vote. So with a bolt of electricity, a revised House Bill 384, now known as House Bill 710, with a few stitched together tweaks, stumbled its way back into the spotlight. Here's Andrew Bartline.
Doing the same thing over and over again.
Aren't y'all tired?
Doesn't take a scientist to tell you that's the definition of legislation.
Rather than going through all of 384 again, because we've already done that, I'm simply going to go through the changes today that we have made.
Another crack at library regulation.
Books being taken out of the library because they're deemed unsuitable or unsafe is devastating to me.
But the bill's written simply, with no need to spend time between the lines.
If your readers read the legislation, please. There is no book banning, and there's no book burning, and there's no book removal.
But there is book relocation. A complaint would either move a book to the adult section or open up the library for a civil lawsuit. What's new? Well, there's now a universal complaint form.
They have to reference in the statute 1815-14 what that book violates.
A notable omission? The bill does not rewrite the current state definition of sexual conduct. It includes homosexuality.
It's sanctioning state-sponsored ignorance.
They add plainly, it's state government overreach. Local policy already covers these concerns.
Let me be clear. There is no pornography in Idaho libraries.
If there are no materials of this type, what's the concern with the legislation?
Ron? If there's no material of that type, I don't see any need for this legislation.
And without specifics,
it is a hypothetical.
Some committee members spent more time waiting for their turn to talk.
Is it your position then that the majority of Idahoans support providing sexually explicit content to minors? Would you prefer to see us decline to act or take action to protect them against things which truly are harmful? Do you think that it's appropriate to expose children to this type of material?
I actually think it's really inappropriate for representatives of the great state of Idaho to ask continual gotcha questions at people who are up here testifying.
But what Representative Young is trying to get at is the Miller test, the judicial standard to determine if a book has value beyond the smut.
If material meets that definition, then it would not be protected speech.
And it's the same test written into the legislation.
Almost verbatim, the Miller test.
Keyword? Almost. The bill fails to include Part 3, which defends an otherwise inappropriate piece of literature that in its whole context has serious artistic, political, or scientific value.
Why did we use an incomplete definition in the enforcement mechanism and leave out that critical piece that's in the Miller test?
Representative Crane, 12.
I'm not understanding the question, Mr. Chairman and Representative Achilles, because we have reference to 1815-14 as current code in the definition section on the legislation, and we're using the Miller test by means to judge that. So I'm not understanding the question.
The bill passed committee along party lines. The only difference from the previous legislation is the inclusion of that universal complaint form and the partial inclusion of the Miller test. And I am going to use the language partial, and he said almost verbatim, maybe being a little generous to the language, completely omits the idea that if you take a paragraph out of context that's inappropriate, that doesn't fly with the Miller test. You have to look at the entire piece of literature and context and then use that determination. But this bill does not have that piece there.
So you can take that certain paragraph and just use that as opposed to the material as a whole.
The pieces of the Miller test they've included, yes, you could do that.
Interesting. All right, so we'll see if there's any indication on the House floor whether they're going to let this one pass through there.
We'll see.
All right, thanks, Andrew. Well, speaking of the House floor, the House passed around several joints this morning, a joint memorial and a joint resolution. A memorial is used to petition the president or Congress, something federal. A resolution is an attempt to make changes to the Constitution, Idaho's or the country's, which is why it requires a 2/3 majority to pass both chambers. So let's start with that joint resolution, HJR 4. This is the one with ranked choice voting in its sights. And it would cement in Idaho's Constitution that elections would be decided by the highest number of votes, regardless of percentage, how much they do get to win. Because as explained by Representative Vito Barbieri, who sponsored the joint resolution, computers.
If we begin to rely on computer logarithms for discerning the outcome of a vote, we have lost it. There is no way to do a review of the results of a ranked choice outcome because the logarithms take care of it. One vote and the logarithm begins to take control and determines the winner.
I believe he's trying to say algorithm there. I'm not exactly sure. However, to say there is no way to review results is also not true, according to Idahoans for Open Primaries. No logarithm determines the winner. The candidate who comes in last place, well, they just get eliminated. And if you voted for that candidate as your top pick, your vote will now count towards your second choice. This process repeats until only 2 candidates remain, and whoever has the most votes after that, well, they win. Representative Barbieri may have been disappointed to learn percentages do matter because that joint resolution died on the House floor after failing to get the 2/3 majority it needed to pass, missed it by 5 votes. The other joint, a memorial, to do several things. House Joint Memorial 11 would implore Congress to tighten security at our country's southern border with Mexico, improve immigration, the process to get in, and also to impeach President Joe Biden for failing to do either of those things. But doing the former is only dependent on the latter. And the bill's sponsor, that'd be Republican Representative Dale Hawkins, he presented a new memorial after ditching the phrase, quote, thirst for cheap immigrant labor, end quote, when talking about how that has brought in drugs and human trafficking to Idaho. So removing, quote, thirst for didn't change the fact there is a need for such labor in Idaho.
Every day we get up in this room and like you, I pledge allegiance to the republic for which this flag stands for. We are on the verge of losing that republic. We are being invaded by people that we don't know. Not only we don't know them, we don't even know where they're coming from.
And the biggest problem with pursuing the border, all in, talk trash, the border, yada, yada, we haven't addressed the need for year-round visas for people to come in and do work. It may come as a shock to you, but most people don't raise their kids to milk cows. I'm sorry. But ag needs workers.
And opponents of this joint memorial also took issue with the fact that the word cheap was left in there because if you're associated with ag and use like the H-2A program to bring in seasonal workers from out of the country, they know it's not cheap, $15 to $18 an hour on average. We talked about this issue before several times, and a study done by the University of Idaho released this year showed about 30,000 undocumented workers are currently working in Idaho. Many of them in agriculture, but most in other jobs like construction or service jobs like in restaurants. This joint memorial didn't touch that, and now it really won't touch anything, including any desk in Congress, as HGM 11 failed to pass the House with a tie vote of 34 to 34. One of the best things about the 208 is when we do a story on something one day, and then a day later, or even that same day, we get a message from one of you which opens up the opportunity for other perspectives on that topic. And one of those is what we talked about last week: mental health resources for Idaho students. House Bill 684 would increase access to behavioral health services in schools, give students a chance for maybe a telehealth session in private on school grounds. A big deal considering 44% of Idaho high school students have struggled with moderate to severe depression. That's according to a survey done by the Boise School District a couple years ago. And 33% have actually thought about suicide. Well, after we talked about it passing the House last Tuesday, we got a message from a therapist who worries about students having to wait to get a traditional session with a counselor. Sometimes it's too late. And while that text told us a lot, Rebecca Rand, well, she had a lot more to say in person. Perhaps the most important, she says taking your kids to get the help they need doesn't make you a bad parent.
When the legislature debates major topics like mental health, it opens the door for the whole community to learn more. House Bill 684 looks to establish optional behavioral health in the form of telehealth for Idaho public schools. Legislation essentially allows public schools to provide access to therapy and counseling services via telehealth on school grounds during a school day.
Do you get a lot of calls from families that say, I have a kid that needs to talk?
Every week,
Really?
every week.
Rebecca Rand is a licensed clinical social worker that owns her own practice in Eagle. Rand has worked as a licensed therapist since 1996.
It's not that we have more mental illness. Everybody's so afraid there's more. We have more awareness.
Awareness is good, Rand says, and House Bill 684 caught her attention. From her experience and conversations with other providers, she believes the proposed law would be a fantastic tool.
One counselor has to cover like multiple schools because that's what's happened. And they get overworked, it's difficult, and some of the school counselors, you know, because of some of the things that are going on, they're overwhelmed, okay? So they need the support so they can do their job better.
Rand is one of many providers that use telehealth to connect with clients here in Idaho and other areas too. She believes getting that as an on-campus option for students will be impactful.
I agree with everybody that said reading, writing, and arithmetic is what the focus is, but you can't focus on that if a child is having an issue where they're depressed, they're anxious, they're not focused, you know, and so having them be able to step outside, maybe cope with it, not have to take off school, not have to miss a test, not have the parents have to explain, I got to take my kid out of school, which then creates some, you know, anxiety with the parents sometimes. It's huge.
A hurdle Rand has seen to the conversation or seeking care for a child, parents worried about what that decision says about them.
It really has to do with your having the courage to not see it as, you know, it's a flaw that you have or something's wrong with your child, but more like, I'm going to get a resource that's available right here. Let me just read and see which one fits for me and my family.
House Bill 684 aligns with the family-centered value of parents and children talking together about finding a solution.
It's mental health. It's not because your kids are crazy. It's because they need to talk just like any other human being, and they're trying to figure it out. And all we do is try to normalize it and make it such that it's not the stigma. Parents can keep from having stigma when they start addressing it as this is a normal thing to do, to just want to talk about feelings, because that's the truth. It is normal.
While increased access is great, it is only as great as people allow it to be. Rand says getting resources before a possible crisis is key. Access to more resources through telehealth, it allows social workers to connect and build meaningful relationships with families and children in need.
And when there's a crisis, then we're talking hospitalization or juvenile detention or truancy or whatever. No, when your child starts looking like something's not quite right, that's the time to start looking, because there can be like a 3-month waiting list because of the volume of people that want help. We have an impact on the future, and our children have an impact. So empowering your community and your kids is all about us being stronger people and mentally well.
And you heard Rand allude to it. She's very honest. The experts, the licensed clinical therapists, the counselors, they're really booked up right now. So if you think this is a direction that your family could go, reach out now. Don't wait before it's a real big problem. But she tells us that she can't take on every single client, but she picks up the phone, she answers everyone, and she helps the best she can to push people in the right direction. But Brian, sometimes, you know, needing that push, that's really all you need. I think there's a lot of families that they don't know what they're doing. So it's a very scary way to kind of go into this conversation. Also, by the way, that legislation that we talked about, waiting for a hearing over in the Senate. Representative Dory Healy actually just emailed me a few minutes ago. She says tomorrow at 3 o'clock, it will be in the Senate Education, so we'll keep an eye on that.
All right, it kind of encapsulates the entire health industry in Idaho. Shortage everywhere across the board, so making it more accessible. All right, could be a good answer for that. Thanks, Joe. Yeah.
You've got to be taught to be afraid of people who love in a different way, or some folks who come here from some other place. You're being quite carefully taught. You've got to be taught to learn who to hate, like people who follow a different faith, and to hate all the people your cable news hates. You've got to be carefully taught. You're being quite carefully taught.
It is the best of times, and it's the worst of times for those who keep watch on the time. Over this past weekend, we sprung forward an hour to jump into daylight saving time, something we've done as a country since 1966's Uniform Time Act. The best of times because so many love these later sunsets. Worst of times because of the hate we all seem to adjusting to those morning alarms those first few days, especially the first week or so. It's brutal for a lot of us, which is why in a number of states, there's been a big push, contrary to the big barbecue lobby, to make standard time the year-round standard. Idaho, no exception. Today, House Bill 584 would put Idaho in the small group of states exempt from making the twice-yearly switch. For years, those in favor have pointed to the medical concerns with the disruption of our circadian rhythms. Those opposed, they're not buying it.
Daylight savings time has been opposed by the American Medical Association, the National Safety Council, and the American Academy for Sleep Medicine. It is unhealthy. It causes accidents. It causes heart issues. It causes many, many medical issues.
Okay, let's just think about that logically. Is that based on the fact that they're sleeping? That they lose an hour of sleep? Because if that be the case, that would purport to say that we all get exactly 8 hours of sleep a day. Nobody ever stays up late to get anything done. Nobody ever travels. Because think about it, if you're flying on an airplane flight and you go to a different time zone, you lost your sleep also. So nobody's going to fly anymore because we might lose an hour of sleep. That's what this is saying.
Representative Ehart's passionate about this. All right, let's put her choice of an example aside for a moment. She may be onto something, though, with this heart issue stuff. Representative Alfieri, well, he's correct. The American Medical Association, the American Heart Association, and the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, they're all opposed to springing forward this time of year because of the damage it apparently does to our hearts and, of course, those increase in car crashes. This is based on studies that have been done years ago. But there's a more recent study that may back up Ehart's enthusiasm. The Mayo Clinic released a study just last month based on a 5-year study of more than 36 million Americans, and they found minimal effect on heart health in the weeks surrounding the switch to daylight saving time, like 74,000 or so. But Idaho representatives, well, they passed it over to the Senate, this bill, 43-26. So does that mean if the Senate gives it the green light, well, Idaho will no longer observe daylight saving time? It could be that easy since federal law allows states to opt out. You can see Hawaii and Arizona. But this bill would only go into effect if 2 of our neighboring states do the same thing. Montana, Wyoming, they tried last year and failed. Utah failed in 2022. Washington and Oregon have efforts this year, but Oregon's, well, it stalled in the House last week. Now it's up to the Senate side of the Idaho State House to see if, well, our version will eventually see the light of day. All right, we got an update to another bill we talked about this session, Senate Bill 1234, 1234, requiring insurance companies to allow 6 months of contraception instead of 1 to 3 months. Well, that passed the House today by just one vote. That is now headed to the governor's desk. It's the 5th time something like this has been tried in the Idaho State House, but this is the first time it's made it through both chambers.
So it is very nice outside right now. Quite a few clouds, a little bit of sunshine poking through. Storm comes in tonight. There's rain. Rain's coming in. The darker green is an indication of heavier rain showers. That's eventually going to make it into Boise here late this evening as well as overnight. So that's where we're going to be seeing the most rain. It's going to be off and on tomorrow, maybe even a thunderstorm tomorrow afternoon. Got to throw in the gusty winds. They're there as well. Here's the amount of rain anticipated with this storm system coming in. So you got just about 1/4 inch of rain in some spots, especially for Boise. Same thing for Nampa and Caldwell, about 1,500ths or a little bit more, and a little over 2,500ths or 1/4 inch for Twin Falls. Now the mountains will have snow, so amounts in the mountains, that's what we could be seeing by the time we get through later tomorrow and into the evening before it starts decreasing in most mountain locations. So could be a good storm for the mountains, even starting out with a little mixture of rain or snow. So the temperatures, this is over the next 10 days. If you look at highs, right along through here, you'll see tomorrow, there you go, right around 50 degrees. Comes down a little bit on Wednesday. Now these temperatures start to go up. And by the time we get into the weekend, there's a possibility that we could be up to about 60 degrees or so. So the showers basically stop Wednesday morning. We're into sunshine through here, and it appears that it holds on into the first part of next week at the very least. And you notice that some of these temperatures get quite a bit warmer as we get into the first part of next week. Just keep in mind that these temperatures are likely not going to hold on. It's pretty early as we head towards spring.
All right, final minute here on this Monday. Let's get to these text messages during the show here. I really appreciate the discussion on telehealth. Rebecca Rand brought up great context to the conversation of mental health and wellness. Too often issues are overlooked by overburdened parents when it takes a village to raise anyone. That one sent in from Justin. Idaho used to have a school counselor in every school, even in the small ones. Funding for schools has been cut in Idaho over the years. Counselors were the first to go. That's kind of how things are going. But it says things are kind of coming back. We'll see if counselors come back to schools. Imagine someone waiting 3 months for a mental health appointment and then being told by the therapist that per Idaho law, they don't have to work with you because you're gay, says Sheila. Not quite a law just yet. That would be House Bill or Senate Bill 1352. It did pass the Senate. It is waiting in the House Health and Welfare Committee. We'll see if that advances. But that, in fact, is the case. If they don't agree with your lifestyle or the fact that you're homosexual, they don't have to treat you. Let's dump the computers and go back to paper ballots. The only problem with that is that it would take perhaps 24 hours to find who actually got elected, then a small price to pay for an honest election. Walt from Nampa. Let's get rid of replay in NFL football, too. We can do that, too. That'd be an option. When it comes to library, the GOP is trying to make a case and then just trying to justify their job. Sadly, their bills seem to always involve children, as if kids in fear are a tool to hammer in their spooky beliefs. We'll be back to do it again tomorrow. See you then.